Kompüterga yazaman. Şunun için mikrofonlarınızı öçürüp koyuңlar, wagyrdy bolmasın da. Bunu nige taşaşımız gerek bolady soň. Good morning, everybody. You are welcome to our lecture on literary, synchronous, and written translation, theory, and practice. Today we will speak about translation of a literary text, in particular, White Fang by Jack London, and the book's translation into Uzbek. I'm lecturer Saparbayeva Gulandam. Before speaking about the translation of the work, it should be mentioned something about the great author of the book, John Griffiths London. He was born by the name John Griffiths Chaney on January 12, 1871. November 22, 1916, he died. As you see, he died early. At his early age. He was an American novelist, journalist, and social activist, a pioneer of commercial fiction and American magazines. He was one of the first American authors to become an international celebrity and earn a large fortune from writing. He was also an innovator in the genre and would later become known as science fiction. It means that he was one of the founders of science fiction. When we speak about his literary career, we must say that not only White Fang, but his famous books that The Call of the Wild, Country Gold Rush, To Build a Fire, To Heathen, gained a lot of fortune among people all over the world. Jack London was part of the radical literary group, The Crowd, in San Francisco, and a passionate advocate of unionization, workers' rights, socialism, and eugenics. He wrote several works dealing with these topics, such as his dystopian novel, The Iron Heel, his nonfiction Expose, The People of the Abyss, For the Classes, and Before Adam. When we speak about White Fang, we must mention that it was a book about wolf dog. First serialized in Outing magazine, it was published in 1906. The story details White Fang's journey to domestication in Yukon Territory and the Northwest Territories during the 1890s. Klondike Gold Rush, it is a companion novel and a thematic mirror to London's best-known work, The Call of the Wild, which is about a kidnapped domesticated dog embracing his wild ancestry to survive and thrive in the wild. If you pay attention to the nature of Jack London's books, mostly they are about nature and animal life, but by this animal life, he tried to describe social to describe the world among wild and human life. Author Jack London of White Fang is written in the point of the titular canine character, enabling London to explore how animals view their world and how they view humans. White Fang examines the violent world of wild animals and the equally violent world of humans. The book also explores complex themes, including morality and redemption. Translation and adaptation to film. We must say that White Fang has been translated into 89. It has been translated into 89 languages, included Uzbek also. As early as 1925, the story was adapted to film, and it has since seen several more thematic adaptations, including a 1991 film starring Ethan Hawke and a 2018 original film for Netflix. It is important to note that 12 films and 2 television series have been adapted according to the work. Translation into, when we speak about its translation into Uzbek, it has been done by Alam Atahan, but the translation has been done through Russian language. But if you read the translation of White Fang, you can find a lot of interesting facts, and I can say that the translation is well done. Yeah, you can see if you have, you can take this book in Uzbek. Next one. What makes when we speak about the translation of White Fang into Uzbek, we must say that a good literary translator, a good translator who has enough knowledge on culture and linguistics, can translate the text very well. A good literary translator not only needs to have a good command of the source language, allowing a comprehensive artistic rhetorical analysis, but should also be able to see, hear, and understand form and perception that is behind a text. A literary translator must be able to comment tone, style, inventiveness, and culture. Apart from these, he or she also should have the ability to reconceptualize or reverbalize the understanding of the source language into the target language, linguistic framework, and cognitive environment. It means that when we speak about translation, not only the literary translation is needed, but also the translator should understand the framework of the work. Framework, it means that what is the book about, why it has been, why has it been written, or the environment, in which environment the events or the plot of the story is taking place. Next one. Interpreting a passage. The translation of literature needs to sound natural, almost like the original. It means that your translation should be as the same as the original work, or should immerse the reader with its content and structure. To some extent, there is a certain level of subjectivity on behalf of the translator. It means that translation depends on mostly on translator's personality. If you have good personality, if you have wide knowledge on the language, it means that you can be a good translator. Literary translation requires the translator to use their best judgment when interpreting passages of the text. The issue of subjectivity is discussed a little more later. Next one. The trail, pay attention. When you look at the translation of the White Fang in Uzbek, you can see the following features. Pay attention. The trail of the god, it's in English, and it's translated into Uzbek as Khudalar ortadan. Khudalar ortadan. Pay attention. If you subjective approach is very important, but we must say that if you are a real Muslim person and the term Khudalar may be incorrect from the cognitive point of view, because Muslim people believe that there is only one God in the world. But from the content of the book and from the views of the dogs who are main characters in the book, the author uses the term Khudalar, and also the trail. Trail bu izlegani, yo'lak yoki bo'lmasa, and not masalan the trail of the Xudolar yo'lagi deb tarjima qilinmagan, Xudolar ortidan deb tarjima qilingan. And also look at the first sentence. In the fall of the year, when the days were shortening and the bite of the frost was coming into the air, White Fang got his chance for liberty. Fall, kuz, were shortening. The bite of the frost was coming into the air. White Fang got his chance for liberty. In Uzbek translation, kuzda kunlar qisqarib, havo soviy boshlaganda, oqso'ylakning qochishi uchun qulay sharoit tug'ildi. Pay attention. Kunlar qisqarib, havo soviy boshlaganda. When the days were shortening and the bite of the frost. Pay attention. Bu yerda izg'irinning keskin azobi deb tarjima qilinsa to'liq ma'no. ызғырынның keskin azabı deyilgende tercüme толық шығар. Lekin tercüme saddalaştırılgan halda savi vakitlerinde deb tushunarli tilda tercüme qilingan. And also we must say that in translation the translation we must say that the translation of the work needs not only content or structural translation, it needs communicative translation also. The aim of literary translation is not to translate literally, it means word for word, what is written in the source language, but what the author meant in each passage, sentence, or paragraph. It means that you should pay attention to each passage, sentence, and paragraph. There might be instances where word-by-word translation needs to be applied, but it remains to the judgment of the translator, or when there are key terms or text critical issues that cannot be unequivocative, determinate. In most cases, the success of a translation is judged by the extent to which it doesn't sound like a translation. It means that when you compare the original version and the translated version of the work, every time the reader judges your translation from the point of view of source language, and also with the representation of stylistic devices in the literary work. When we speak about stylistic devices in the literary translation, we must say that there are certain literary devices, descriptive and expressive devices in literature in belles lettres style. And in translation, these stylistic devices should be preserved in target language text. An aspect of literary translation is that an aspect not to be overlooked by a translator is the notion of the registers, the socially defined variety of languages within a culture. For example, formal or informal, technical or non-technical, urban or rural, jargon or non-jargon, vulgarity or property. Among the different elements in a translation, registers matter. What is register? Register is the language of special group of people who use in their everyday communication. For example, if you are given an informal text, if you translate it formally, your translation may not seem as a good translation. Or if you are given technical text and you translate it non-technically, your translation will seem insufficient. So the translation of White Fang is a language of rural people, and the people who are searching for gold in cold areas, and the language of the book is the language of animals and human beings also. And when you are translating each character's speech, the point should be taken into account. The register matter should be taken account. Who is speaking and what is he saying in what condition? And if you answer in your translation to these questions, you will have excellent translation. Next one, the tone. When we speak about the translation of literary work, a translation should not neglect the element of tone. What is tone? Tone bu ahang deb tarjima qilinadi. The tone indicates the general feeling being conveyed in a passage, a sentence, an utterance, or the entire project. It can involve any sentiment, humor, sincerity, naivety, irony. Tone violation can distort the author's intent. It means that in your translation, you should pay attention to the pragmatic aspects of translation, such as speaker's feelings and sensitiveness and its attitude towards the object which is under the event. It means that if the author is saying sadly one passage, you should translate, you should represent author's intention, sadly, in your translation. If the author is happy, it means that you should survive this happens in your translation. This is called the tone of translation. Some techniques used by literary translators for the success of a project can be said that this is the result of all research done on translation of literary works. 5 major techniques are suggested for the translation. First, adaptation, linguistic amplification, compensation, elision, and borrowing. Adaptation, linguistic amplification, compensation, and elision and borrowing. Let's see all of these techniques turn by turn. At first, it is important to do your research about the author or contact the author directly to obtain more insight about their perspective of the book or literary work. It means that if you have chance, at first you should get well acquainted with the author, ask some points, but before having a talk with the author, at least you should have read the book in original. And then you can ask some points if it's not clear for you in the original text. If you have no chance to have a talk with the author, it means that it's up to you, and you should read it 2 or 3 times one sentence and try to get the content of the sentence from the passage. Adaptation implies adapting the source language in a manner to be understandable by the target audience. Adaptation may mean non-literal translation of the content. The important thing here is the meaning of the sentence paragraph instead of the words comprising it. Translators acquire adaptation skills mostly with practice and experience and a good knowledge of both the target and the source language. As we have seen in above translation of The Trail of the Goddess, the author used adaptation because Xudolar ortadan. There is no word-for-word translation in target text. The author used adaptation. It means that author used his culture and the linguistic skills and changed the content of the translation in target language. But anyway, the reader can guess the meaning of the sentence well in own language. Next one, linguistic amplification. The use of the technique is applied when there are words in the source language for which there is no equivalent in the target language. It means that if there is no translation for the word in your own language or in the language of translation, you can use linguistic amplification. In French, we call this les intraduisibles or untranslatable words. The technique requires a bit of creativity, problem solving on the part of the translator. The sentence paragraph in the target language should retain the same meaning and convey the same message as the source language. It's essential to read carefully in order to understand the author's intent. And then you can make linguistic amplification and then give descriptive or explanatory translation for the word in brackets or in footnotes. Demek, qavsichida izoh berishingiz mumkin yoki bo'lmasa iqtibos berishingiz mumkin varaqning pastki qismida. Iqtibos bu silkalar. Next one, compensation is the next translation technique of literary texts. A good translator needs to know how to compensate. When there is a piece of information that does not fit well in its original place, the translator can compensate by moving such information into another location. The technique is intended to compensate for the loss the source language may suffer if the text is left out entirely or kept in its original place. The main purpose is to maintain a stylistic quality of the content. Under no circumstance does compensation eliminate what is essential. What is compensation? It means that the word remains the word remains in target text, but it may need some extra elements in order to suit it to the target language context. In order to set it to the target language context, it means that you may add something. For example, escape, yes, to escape or to get liberty, to get liberty in the previous sentence. Demek kaçış üçün deb tarjima qilindi. Demek ozodlikka erishish uchun degan birikma qochib ketish uchun, ya'ni qochishi bu uning ozodligini anglatadi. And so this kind of technique is called compensation. The translation of the word exists in target language, but also doesn't need this version. He takes the synonym or the equivalent of the word in target language literary translation. Next one, elision. Elision. This technique is the opposite of the linguistic amplification technique. It involves removing text from the source language so that it does not appear in the target language. Matında, it means that some part of the text intentionally is taken out in the context, and then the target language doesn't have this text in target language. For example, here you can add the translations of scolding words, rude words, and also some liners of from old texts or from religious texts. For example, if you have some kind of Arabic words or borrowings in your speech, for example, if you are reading a line from Quran, yes, Alhamdulillah, or something else, and then you can add, you can drop it in your translation. You can only say some lines from Quran has been read by somebody. And also, such kind of elements are used in White Fang also. The languages or the dog's vow or wolf's vows are omitted in translation because some of them has been expressed linguistically. Well, next one. To realize this item considered not essential are taken off with the aim of improving the stylistic quality of the translation. It means that all of these changes are aimed at to support the quality of the translation in target language. Borrowing. Borrowing in literary translation is common and employed by the translators is that of borrowing. It involves using a word from the source language and placing it on the target language without any modification. You take the word from one language and then take it into the target language. Usually names of characters are taken as borrowings into Uzbek text in its translation of White Fang or Aksoyla. It may also be the case that the expression derives from a third language or simply an untranslated expression that does not need any explanation. When you are using borrowing, you can use transcription, you can use transliteration or calcul translation into target language. What is transcription? If you are using the borrowed word in your target language, if you try the sounds of the word in your target translation, it will be transcription. If you try to preserve the letters in your target translation, it will be transliteration. And if you use the word in its original version and take it into your target language without any changes, it will be calcul translation. Next one. As for footnotes, the use of footnotes is often useful when translating non-fiction or fiction work. It allows the translator to pinpoint problem words, sentences, or explain cultural context. However, for fiction work, footnotes may seem somewhat disturbing, taking the attention of the reader away from the text to some piece of information below. Despite being useful, in this context, it is often avoided. It's often avoided, and also usually at the back part of the book, you can see footnotes. You can see footnotes or explanations for the words which are common to the context of the book, but out of context you may not understand. In such cases, the description of words, definition of words are given. Next one. The issue of the translator's subjectivity. When we speak about translator subjectivity or personal approach to the content, the most qualified translator might not be in geographically close to the author, or the author may have moved on mentally from his work, so consulting him may not necessarily yield the best result. The original author might also be long dead and is therefore unconsultable. So in many cases, the only way to interpret the text is from the text. It means that you should read the text, and try to preserve the nature of the text in your target language. Please avoid subjectivity or giving your own personal opinion on the text and adding or doing explanatory other works in your translation, because it may spoil the nature of the work, because the work is famous with its original form. To obtain an objective interpretation, the translator objective interpretation, it means that your translation is suitable to the content and structure of the text. The translator needs to carefully consider the author's personal experience or concepts. The translator obtains the reference to use in his interpretation of the literary text when it is conditioned with the author's personal experience or vision of life. In such circumstances, the translator studies the source language, then through the process of decoding establishes a relationship between the meaning and the author's thoughts. Approaching the source text in that manner allows the translator to avoid speculative interpretation of the author's intent and helps him or her achieve an objective retention of the source language. I must say that if you have translated one text from English into Uzbek or from Uzbek into English, even if you have survived all words in your translation may not be understandable to the reader. Why? Because you have missed communicative approach in your translation, and also you have forgotten the objective interpretation of the work. It means that you have forgotten what did the author want to say by this passage, by this sentence, by this text. It means that when you are translating a sentence, passage, or text from one language into another, you should link your sentence to the previous one and create fundament for the next forthcoming translation part. 5 areas of the source language that the translator needs to focus on. First, phonological features, figure of speech, semantic features, syntactic features, and positional features. As you see, phonological features, it involves rhythm and alliteration, sense in sound. It means that to what word the author is paying more attention in the sentence. The figure of speech is a metaphor or analogy. It means that you should pay attention to the stylistic devices used in source language text and try to preserve it in your target language text. Next one, semantic features, synonyms, antonyms, leitmotifs, keywords should be preserved in translation, because not all synonyms have the same meaning, but they slightly differ in their content. Next one, syntactic features, prefixes and suffixes, word constructions, verb tenses. For example, in the previous translation, Xudolar ortadan, but in the work it was written, the trail of the god, not goddess. It means that when you are translating from one language into another, you should pay attention to the prefixes, suffixes, word construction, verb tenses, because even the position of the word may change the content of the sentence. Positional features, parallelisms, paragraph structure, foregrounding, and etc. Parallelism, it means that sometimes you may use one equivalent, but this equivalent may not be a good representative of the target language text. It means that you should be able parallel constructions which have the same meaning in target language, no matter the structure. Sometimes translation of stylistic devices in literary works may seem quite different in their stylistic translations because the languages differ in their stylistic usage. So it means that if you have one stylistic device in your source language, you should take the original, you should take the target one in your own language, which can best suit to the content of the stylistic device in source language. Paragraph structures, it means that paragraph structures should be obeyed according to the target language rules. And foregrounding, it means that your translation, as I have mentioned before, foregrounding, as I have mentioned before, one sentence translation should be linked to the previous one and the forthcoming or the next translation of the sentence. Cognitive effect of the text. When we speak about this, when your translation conveys all of this above mentioned, five techniques of translation, five features of translation, it means that you could achieve cognitive effect on the translation of the text. It remains in the responsibility of the translator to seek language choices that create increased cognitive effects. The success of a literary work depends on the extent to which a translator can recreate the author's intention and feeling encapsulated inside the work. There are also methods that a translator can implement to analyze a literary work, for instance, the rolling translation approach, which involves gradually molding the translation into a required shape. As I have mentioned before, there are 12, it has been translated into, the work White Fang has been translated into 89 languages, and only in English it has 12 translations. It has 12 translations even within English, because the language, the work has been written in the last century, and it has been adapted into modern language and by different authors. Each author uses their own subjective approach in their translation and enriches the nature of translation. By their enriching the content of the work, they made their contribution to the achievement of source language content in their own languages. As for Uzbek translation, we can say that not all stylistic devices have been preserved in translation, but the language has been simplified. And also, if you want in future, if you want to do some research on literary translation, you can observe, you can study the stylistic devices which are used in source language White Fang by Jack London, and you can compare them. Translate them into Uzbek language. At first, choose the stylistic devices, translate them into Uzbek, and then redo the translation of the White Fang into Uzbek once more. Because translation from English into Uzbek is more successful than translation into Russian and then into Uzbek, and then direct or indirect translation. If you translate from English into Uzbek, it will be direct translation. If the translation which has been done through Russian is called indirect translation. I must say that, for example, if we take the content of the source language text as 100% in translation, a good translator can survive 90% of the content and structure of the translation. But we cannot say all translations are successful. Otherwise, 12 types of translation couldn't appear in the translation field of one novel White Fang. It means that in future, I wish we will have excellent translators of a White Fang from English into Uzbek. It will be a good job for Uzbek learners, even it has been translated by some translators. I cannot say that all of them are excellent translations because they base it on Russian translation. In translation, 25%, I can say that 25% of stylistic devices or semantic meanings or lexical features have been dropped out in translation. It means that good translation of literary work needs hard work. On Moodle system, you are given a passage from White Fang and Uzbek, and you should compare it with the English translation, with the English work. English translation, I can say, because it has been translated into modern language by English translators. It's the interpretation. It means that you should read the passage in Uzbek and then find out this passage in original interpretation of White Fang. Compare sentences in it and find out the words which are dropped out in translation, and suggest your own translation for the words which are lost in translation. If you have questions, you are welcome. The lesson, I'm finishing the lesson. We have 1 minute left. Bizde 1 minut vaqt var. Agar savollarınız bolsa, marhamat. Demek siz qiladigan tarjima, Moodle sistemadagi tarjima, berilgan passageni o'zbek tilida berilgan, tarjimasi ham bor uning, o'zi asl inglizchasi variantini olasiz, PDF variantini solishtirasizda, qaysi so'zlar tushib qolgan bo'lsa, shu so'zni topasiz. Keyin shu so'zga o'zingizning variantingizni taklif qiling, dag'in gaplarni qaytadan tarjima qiling. O'zbek tilina tarjima qilasizlar. Tushunarlimi topshiriq? Gulasal, tushundinglarmi topshiriqni? Demak, Moodle'da berilgan topshiriqni sizlar o'zlaringiz tarjima qiling. Balki sizning tarjimangiz, chunki u qarang, tarjima qilingan vaqtida o'zbek tiliga tarjima qilinganda bu demak Olim Otaxon tomonidan tarjima qilingan, lekin u rus tili orqali tarjima qilingan. To'g'ridan-to'g'ri ingliz tilidan o'zbek tiliga tarjima qilingan emas. Demak, siz qiladigan tarjima haqiqiy inglizcha variant bilan o'zbekcha variantni solishtirib ko'ring. Nerda qaysi so'z tushib qolgan? Tushunarlimi? Tushib qolgan so'zni qanday almashtirish mumkin? O'zingizning variantingizni berib, topshiriqni bajaringlar. Savollaringiz bo'lsa, marhamat.
Yo'q,
savol yo'qmi? Qarang, 3-paradagi darsda, demak, men hozir net olaman, Go'zal opamning o'rnida institutga borib ishlashim kerak, tushunarlimi? Shuning uchun 3-paradagini Zoomda o'ta olaman, lekin uningcha alohida material yana ham tashlab qo'yaman.